Thanks, Alistair. So I'm Richard Watson. I'm Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Strategy and Transformation for Suffolk and North East Essex Integrated Care Board. It's a very long title, but what that boils down to effectively is that I lead a lot of our strategy, our planning, and our system change programs across Suffolk and North East Essex.
Right, thank you very much. And in your role, what are the main strategic challenges that's facing you and the ICB, ICS at the moment, and how are you going about tackling them?
So I don't think we're different to most. I think if you looked at all of the 42, I would probably say there's 3 or 4 things that are affecting us at the moment in terms of our challenges. And the first is just demand, which is nothing new. The sheer scale of demand, warranted and unwarranted, I would say, in terms of health and care services, is a huge challenge to all of us in terms of how we respond to that. A major part of that is the workforce. So how do we continue to grow but change and evolve the workforce to actually manage that demand and those pressures? Funding. I don't think you could have a conversation on the NHS without talking around money, but I don't think it's necessarily just around more money. It's around how that money is best utilised to meet those challenges that we've got. And then I would say the hardest, I would say, is probably expectations from our actual population in terms of rightly what they expect from the health service. Secondly, our staff, particularly over the last 3 years in terms of what they've experienced coming out of the COVID pandemic, but with, as I've said, demand still hugely high on them. And then our political leadership. So the expectations from both local and national politicians, rightly in terms of what they've been elected on and what they're expected to deliver. So I think when you bring all those together, that can look incredibly scary in terms of, well, how are we even going to manage to do anything on that?
Yeah.
But I think how we're going to tackle that is, I think you need to balance the ongoing here and now with the medium to long term. I'm sure we'll get into that, Alistair, because alongside that, you've also got that long held ambition, at least locally, around tackling those ingrained inequalities in access and outcomes. And I think you can often get blown off course when you're kind of looking at the here and now against those challenges I've just described. So for us, our approach is that we cannot overcome any of those challenges, short and long term, without collaborating across the local system. We just can't.
Yeah.
None of those are possible. But what does that mean? Because it's easy to say, isn't it? I think we need to be clear around what are the shared problems we face. So how do we get together to find common cause across health, care, voluntary care sector, our service users, around what are those real problems? Because it's easy to say it's demand, but what does that mean for each of the partners? But also being clear around what are the outcomes? What are we actually trying to achieve? What's our end goal? And actually, is those end goals that each of the partners looking to, do they coalesce? Is there a way forward in terms of how we can work together on that? That sounds easy, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I think the last point would be, so much of that is around relationships. So how can you ensure locally that you've got strong, robust and pragmatic relationships to enable us to stand any chance of achieving the outcomes that we set against those challenges?
That's really helpful. And I suppose it leads me to my next question, which is, you have a number of mandated processes to produce various reports and strategies for others, but you might well have your own ways of doing things. So I'd be interested, what are the kind of main processes and outputs you've got them, and what's really helpful given those challenges and your approach that you've just outlined?
So I think it's fair to say that strategy development is a relatively small part of my role, even though I'm director of strategy, and also a relatively small part of the system. And that's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. I think it's good insofar as, to some extent, we need to get on. We need to get on and deliver and start to really drive change in the local system against those challenges that I set out and the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. But it can be bad in that we do have a habit within the public sector, and particularly the NHS, of reacting to the latest crisis or the latest priority. And we don't always take a step back. And I'm just as guilty of this, of taking a step back and thinking strategically around what's really going on and how we actually going to tackle that problem. So I think there's good and bad points around actually that importance of strategy. For us, and you've kind of alluded to it, Alistair, we've got our ICS strategy. and we've got our ICB joint forward plan. So both of those, as you know, are mandated by the central government. I think that's right. I think that's good that each local area has their own strategy, and then the ICB themselves has their plan. And to be fair, I think there was quite a permissive set of guidance, and that has been a noticeable change from old in terms of the fact that NHS England and the Department of Health and Social Care have actually given ICSs, ICBs quite a lot of leeway to set out what they want to achieve locally. At the same time, though, we're still having in mind that we're a national health service and we've got to deliver against those absolutely important national priorities. So I think there's definitely been a change, and it's been one in which we've embraced locally. And our approach to that, as you know, has been quite inclusive. So we've tried to work very inclusively with our population and with our partners to make sure that we have a strategy and a plan that we own collectively, then it's not seen to have been done to, or then when you're trying to implement it, well, we had no opportunity to be part of that. But I think while they're useful, they are at a point in time. So you need to ensure that you're flexible and pragmatic, because as new challenges emerge and priorities change, don't stick rigidly to that strategy. Be nimble in terms of how you do that. But I think having that framework is actually really helpful in terms of how you're approaching challenges as they come up.
So I suppose, you know, given that you've got that great framework, which is owned and engages across the system, when those particular challenges come up, well, it might be new things because they're new expectations or requests from the centre or other partners, or it's new emerging demands and pressures in the system. How do you kind of make sure there is a bit of strategic thinking about what you do, and maybe the opportunity to think innovatively rather than just, you know, do more of the same? And obviously that's really exacerbated this year because there's an election looming. And I know you probably understand some of the politics better than some others because you were a local councillor, weren't you? So you kind of know that how that those two kind of worlds work together a bit. So I'm intrigued as to how you make that strategic thinking space or approach in the midst of everything.
I think that's the £1 million question, Alistair, to be honest. And I'm asked that a lot. I think most people in these kind of roles are. And I wouldn't pretend that it's easy, and I wouldn't pretend I've got the complete answer even after 20 odd years now of working in the public sector. I think that the honest answer is it's a constant juggling act every day to try and manage the day-to-day pressures, the competing priorities, but also keeping that eye on the prize in terms of those longer term outcomes that we've talked about in our strategy and our joint forward plan. But I don't think the two are polar opposites. I think often they can appear to be. I think the trick is, if we're going to tackle those big political priorities, particularly going into an election year, I think the way to do that, such as, you know, elected, whichever political stripe forms the next government, I can't imagine that elective weights, demands on emergency care, primary care access, the mental health challenge that the country is experiencing. I don't think the challenges are going to change. We may get differential approach to how we tackle those, but I actually think to enable us to achieve against those, we have to think differently. We have to think innovatively, because if we carry on doing more of the same, we're not going to achieve them. So that's where I think there is a juxtaposition between, you know, the here and now challenge we're facing, but thinking with a different mindset. And it is hard when you're under a lot of pressure to just give that time to think, is there a different way we can tackle some of these endemic problems? And I think one of the ways that we've tried to do that locally is we did take a decision, and it was a difficult one, particularly I think in the context of the running cost allocation reductions that all ICBs are facing in England, that we have ring-fence capacity in our ICB for strategic planning, healthcare insight, innovation and intelligence. And that includes the importance of population health management. And we're using that insight, that intel, that unit to actually help us with some of those day-to-day challenges that we're experiencing. And it really well complements the operational teams that we've got, who are more in the here and now.
Yeah, no, so that's there's always a group who are working through that insight and intelligence to make available for whatever the challenge is, it sounds like. So
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. And that draws Pan System. I
Yes,
assume.
yeah. So we've, again, the approach is, you've worked with us for a while, Alistair, the approach we've taken in Suffolk and North East Essex is that, again, the best way to do that, given all of our partners are absolutely struggling in the same way, is we've set that up across health and social care. So actually, one of our county councils hosts that intelligence hub on behalf of the wider system, and then we've got an arrangement where teams across our different partners work together. Again, it's back to one of my early comments. The only way we're going to tackle those challenges I've described is if we work together.
Absolutely, yeah. And the final question was, what's helpful for facilitating your own strategic thinking and that of your colleagues, as you say, in the midst of what is, a difficult context, and your priority is delivery, is the actual doing. So are there things that you find are really helpful, either personally or collectively?
I think it's probably quite different for each person, but I think there's three things for me that I touch on with that question. I think the first is recognizing that relationships are key. So relationships are key to delivering against the challenges that I've talked about, and about delivering those outcomes that we want to achieve. And I think if you don't find the time in your diary to actually get to know your colleagues, particularly across your system, so not just within your local organisation, but across your system, you're really going to struggle to achieve anything, whether that's short term or some of those long term ambitions. So really carving out the time for a coffee or lunch or whatever to get to know your colleagues, I think is really important, because that's where I think I often get the best time to talk informally about our challenges, our ideas, ways in which we can collaborate and work together. I think the second one for me is having a support network. I think particularly at this level, you do need a support network around you. They're tough jobs. We've got a lot to do, rightly. So for me, actually having that support network that can advise, support and challenge you in your thinking is important. So I'm fortunate to be part of the King's Fund network, which helps with this. And we also have a Directors of Strategy informal group now across the east of England, which again has been really helpful. And that's not just within commissioning land, that's across provider, commissioner and further afield. And I think particularly having different professionals, even though we're all directors of strategy and change, we're all dealing with slightly different things. So that's been incredibly useful. And I think the third thing, and I think this is the one that always falls off your time, and is finding time to develop yourself and your own thinking outside the day-to-day work that you're doing. And I think this is really important. It's one thing that, I'll be honest, I've not done enough of, and I'm making a real effort this year to do more of it. So I've literally actually just come from a 3-day program run by the Leadership College for Government, which is working with it's real. I've not heard of them until recently. So they've come out of the Central Civil Service, but they're actually working across the wider public sector across the UK now. So just in short, brought together 30 senior leaders across the public sector in the UK around how do we lead collaboratively across complex systems, complex organisation. And it's been incredibly fascinating to hear from other parts of the public sector. So we've had education, ambassadors, a couple of ambassadors there, central civil servants, and I'll be honest, the same challenges come up time and again. So it's really interesting when you're in your silo in the NHS, actually to take time out and really think more creatively with others around what are some of those problems and some of those solutions. So it's really challenged my thinking, and I've already got some really good ideas around what we could do within our local system. So they would be the three things for me, Alistair, in terms of my take home for this.
No, that sounds really interesting and insightful, and I couldn't agree more with you saying relationships are key, and putting the time into building informal relationships, because it unlocks so many things. So that's fascinating. And I'm also aware that as an ICS, you have a Thinking Differently program,
we do.
Which I think it strikes me as possibly a collective opportunity to do some of that step back stuff. Do you want to say a little bit about how that's worked out?
So I think one of the other possible differences that we've got within our wider integrated care system is that we have continued to invest in an actual integrated care system team led by Susanna Howard, our program director. And this has been incredibly helpful, I think, in that wider integrated care system space to really challenge some of our thinking. And as you've alluded to, Alistair, we've been running that Thinking Differently program for about, I think, 3 or 4 years now. So in short, what it does is where we've got a wicked issue or a challenge that really sits across lots of partners, we actually bring together a program about 2 to 3 hours where we bring a wide audience together who are interested or involved in that issue. And then we bring together a number of speakers effectively. So whether they're external who can challenge some of our thinking, internal or otherwise. So we really get a real understanding of what are the problems, what we're trying to achieve, and then how are we going to take it forward. So they've been really, really, really helpful events. And also, I would argue they've opened a lot of eyes and minds to problems that maybe we didn't think existed. So yeah. I think they've definitely got a place in terms of how we're approaching the achievement of our strategy.
Yeah, and having had a chance to participate in a couple and read a number of them, I think it also, the fact that it's done collectively, partners across the system, some of whom you might not necessarily think, oh, that's on my desk as an issue, but because you work through it together, you go, right, collectively, how can we do it, and how can we all contribute to it? And I think that creates that feeds the collective leadership culture and sense of who we are and what we're trying to do together, which is powerful in Suffolk and North East Essex, I think. So thank you very much for your time, Richard.
You're welcome.
That's been really, really valuable and helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.